A legislative committee signed off today on a proposal from Governor Mills that would give the state one of the least restrictive abortion laws in the country. Maine's current laws allow abortions until a fetus becomes viable, which is generally considered to be around 24 weeks. Mills' proposal would change state law to allow abortion after fetal viability if it's deemed necessary by a physician. The Maine Medical Association testified in support of the law change, saying it is extremely unlikely that the bill as written will result in terminations of late pregnancies that are viable. This potential law change is playing out against a broader backdrop of efforts to expand or restrict abortion access in states around the country.